You're listening to Taste for Truth Weight Loss Encouragement. I'm your host, Barb Raveling. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you all here. And today I am excited to have Debbie here. And this is a victory interview because Debbie has lost her weight and kept her weight off for 6 years. She went from a size 28 to size 12. So welcome to the podcast, Debbie.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. We were having some techie difficulties, so we're going to see how this is going to work. If you hear little glitches, it's like we're trying our hardest, but having a few little problems. So, Debbie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I am in my early 40s. I live in a small northern community in British Columbia, Canada. I'm happily married. I have 4 children who will all be teenagers come July. And I am an educational assistant. I actually work at the same school that all 4 of my kids go to. And 2 of those kids, my oldest boys, will be graduating in June.
That's great. So she has a nice family. She's super young. She got married really young. And there's a lot of advantages of being married old and a lot of advantages to being married young, right? Okay, so why don't you tell us a little bit? I mean, it's weight loss something you've always struggled with a little bit. Did you start when you were really young or?
So I've always struggled with my weight. I actually can't remember a time that I didn't. I remember going to doctors as young as probably like 6 or 7, and my mom being really concerned because she always says I went from a healthy sized 4-year-old to an overweight child, and she couldn't really see what caused that difference. So it's been part of my story forever. I can't actually tell you a time when it wasn't. I was a plump child. I look back at my photos now and I think I wasn't as big as I remember myself being as a kid, but I was definitely bullied and teased in school. And then in high school, I gained a lot of weight. And by grade 11, I was 340 pounds. And then I managed to lose that weight in grade 12. I got down to about 210. I was a size 16, 18 when I was around 210 pounds. And then I gained a bit back around 250, and I maintained that for years. I met my husband at that weight. And then I had my twins, my first 2 are twins, and I put all my weight back on. I got back up into the 300s and then stayed heavy until after my son Jacob was born. And I managed to lose that weight again. And I got down into the 210 area, around 210. And and then I maintained around 250. I got back up, maintained around 250 for years until my husband, through the pregnancy of my daughter, I'll say I actually maintained my weight through that pregnancy. And then my husband got laid off and our whole world, I say, hit the fan. And he had to end up moving away for big chunks of time. And I was a mom alone a lot with 4 kids. My daughter was only 3 when that happened. And it was a very trying time. And I really turned to food during that season. And I got all the way back up to over 340. The highest I know I was at was around 350. So, and that's where I was before I started my next weight loss journey.
Right. So the interesting thing is you were a person who could make yourself lose weight with self-discipline. I mean, a lot of times people are yo-yo dieters, but it's only 20 pounds, which still takes a lot of discipline, even for 20 pounds. But for 100 pounds, that's a lot to go up and down a few times.
Yeah. No, I would drop. Each time I would drop from, never actually done the math, but what is 350 to 210?
That's 140 pounds.
140 pounds. So I dropped that at least twice in my life before this last time. And now I'm smaller than I ever was that first time. So I just don't weigh myself because of my own battle with the scale. But I know that I'm below that because I now being a size 12, I was a size 16 at 210. So.
Okay. So what was different about your last journey?
So in January 2017, I was journaling and I read back and I was saying to myself that I wasn't going to set a New Year's resolution. I wanted to be healthy and I knew I needed to change, but I truly felt like I gave up on myself and my ability to have lasting change. And I also knew what it took to lose weight. And I just felt like I was never, ever, ever going to be able to do that again. It felt like it was two extremes. Either it was an extreme of diet and exercise where I was wearing myself out physically, or it was the extreme of eating what I wanted when I wanted to. And I didn't want those extremes. So I was saying, God, how do I find balance? How do I find it? And that's when he took me on a journey to emotional freedom and freedom from addiction and freedom from the control of food.
Yeah, that's so interesting because, you felt like you could do it, and a lot of people don't. I mean, a lot of people just don't have the discipline or like say for me, for example, I was never tempted to over exercise or be super strict because I just didn't have enough self-control. So I think a lot of people would say, if you had the self-control to be really strict with the exercise and strict with the food, couldn't you just use self-control all your life to keep it off?
So I did have lots of self-control, and I definitely had an all or nothing personality. And I still have pretty amazing self-discipline. I can make myself do things. But what I meant by two extremes is that I wasn't happy there. And I was wearing myself out. I would exercise. It would become an idol in itself. So I felt like either diet and exercise were my God or food was my God. And there was no in between for me. And that was one of the things that I had to learn to let go through renewing my mind, was the diet culture, I've heard it called by other people. And it didn't work for me. I would beat myself up and I would live kind of what it felt like in bondage, to be perfectly honest. I felt like I was hamster on a wheel. I was just going around and around and around and around, and I was digging myself this big hole. And yeah, I'd lose the weight, but I had to keep this level of insanity up to maintain it. And I just couldn't do it long term.
That's so interesting. So you had the self-control to do it, but you were doing so much, you couldn't, you just couldn't keep it up stamina-wise in your life because it's exhausting, right?
Oh, exactly. And I have 4 kids. So finding that much time to exercise and to be able to control my food intake that precisely it's a lot of mental and physical energy. And I just didn't have it anymore. And that's where I was telling God, I give up. I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. And then I would go into this other role of self-pity, where it would be, I'd feel sorry for myself. So then I would kind of hide there, away from God, away from my feelings. And I would just eat and eat and eat because it felt good. And food is really a drug to me. It numbs me. And a lot of the time when I didn't want to feel, I would eat because I'd feel good in that moment.
Right.
And I really had to figure out another way to feel happy.
So how did you go about figuring out another way to feel happy then?
Journaling.
Okay.
A lot of renewing my mind. As I said in my intro, I've been heavy my whole life. And so with being heavy your whole life comes a lot of insecurity because we live in a culture that doesn't accept us. And one of the first things I actually had to do when I looked back over my journal was I had to forgive my culture. I had to actually say, it's okay. It doesn't matter what they think of me. It doesn't matter what the world tells me I am. God loves me and accepts me right now. And that was the very first step I took on the journey, was actually getting to a place where I realized I'm loved and I'm accepted as is. And that was a huge thing for me, that it didn't matter if I lost my weight. It didn't matter what I ate. It didn't matter what I did. God loved me because I was me. And I think that my whole life, I kind of had a wrong idea about God, and I thought that I had to be perfect for God to love me. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't be perfect. And that was part of diet and exercise.
Yeah, that's super interesting because I know you talked to me earlier when we were visiting before the interview. You said you did the Bible study, Freedom from Emotional Eating, and you learned how to truth journal. So when Debbie talks about journaling, she's talking about truth journaling. So I find it really interesting. You started truth journaling about your body image before you started truth journaling about the food. And that sounds super helpful, I think. Do you think that helped you eventually to lose weight, to start having truths about the body?
I do. I really feel like, I forget what psalm it is, but there's that psalm where it says Jesus picks you up out of the mud and the mire and he sets your feet on solid ground. And I was stuck in the mud. And what I really feel like is nothing short of a miracle, where Jesus picked me up and he took me out of that mud and he started to clean me up and heal my heart, and he bound up my wounds. And a lot of those wounds for me were connected to my body image.
Okay.
And my identity.
And what were a couple of the lies that when you were truth journaling, what were the lies that kept showing up at that time in your journal?
You'll never be good enough was a big one. So.
And what did you put for the truth for that one?
You don't have to be, because Jesus is.
Okay, that's good. What else did you put for lies?
That you'll never be accepted. You're not acceptable.
Okay, what's the truth for that one?
That Jesus accepts you as is.
Yeah, and I would also say most people accept you as is, right? I mean, didn't you, when you really looked around at all your friends, do you feel like, oh, you know what? I'm believing a lie. They actually do accept me. I don't have to be really skinny.
It's funny you say that, because if you talk to all the people that have been in my life, my husband, my family, my friends, they'll all say, we didn't even realize you were that big.
That's so funny.
Yeah. So yes, you're absolutely right. And that is one of the things I would say to that lie. I would say, I am accepted. My mom accepts me. My sisters accept me. My husband accepts me. And I would say that to combat that lie a lot.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you transitioned from renewing about bodies. So I'm guessing you must have transitioned to truth journaling about food or emotional situations. What did you truth journal about next?
I started truth journaling about how I need food and I deserve food, and that I need good food. That was a specific lie that I wrote a lot in my journal. Was food has to taste good to be good.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I deserve good food.
Because, and when do you put the truths for those? Or go ahead.
So because the boundaries that I had were to do with, I gave up refined foods. So I gave up refined sugar, and I gave up refined grains, and I gave up dairy. And when you cut those things out of your diet, you lose a lot of flavor and processed food. So I was craving processed food like crazy, and I was feeling sorry for myself. So that's where those lies were coming from. I deserve good food. Food should taste good. And so I would, I guess the truth that I used to write for that is that it's a lie that food has to taste good. Food has to be good and has to be good for me. So I used to say that.
Interesting. I think I would also say a lie in that situation that I would write down is, my life is so boring. Now all I have is boring food to eat. Would you have believed that lie as well?
I can't say I ever wrote that one down. I think the main one is, it's not fair.
Oh, yeah.
I wrote it's not fair a lot, because like I said about my weight loss story, I've been overweight my whole life. And when I was 5, my mom all of a sudden was like, you put on a ton of weight, and I couldn't figure out what happened. So I metabolically put on weight very easily. And so I do eat very strict to maintain the weight that I live at. And so I've had doctors say, man, by the way you eat, why aren't you thinner? And so I think where I was saying where it isn't fair is, I felt like, why is it that I have a body that needs so little calories? So, right? Why do I have to have this body where I can't splurge and I can't have all these yummy treats and I can't eat what I want when I want? That was a lie. I journaled tons. And it was really coming to this piece of God created my body. It's who he made me to be. And I had to flip my understanding from it's not fair to it's an opportunity. And that's what I used to tell myself.
And what were you saying? It's an opportunity to do.
It's an opportunity to grow closer to God, because
that's interesting.
I have to give it to him. And in one of your books, I can't remember which one. Well, one of the things that you said in one of your books is I didn't know how important the truth was until it set me free. Mm-hmm. And that is one that I tell myself. I lived that. But one of the things that really stood out to me was how food can be an idol, and how you have to if you're putting it ahead of God. And there's somewhere in one of your books, you talk about how the idol of food is not socially acceptable in some ways. And we're lucky in that, because it makes us focus on it, and it makes us think about overeating, and it makes us think about, well, why do I overeat? Because it's socially not acceptable. So for me, I had to use that to be like, it's an opportunity for me to give this up and say, God, I can't have this. I want this, and I have to rely on you. You're the only thing that can satisfy me.
That makes sense. Because I think, I would think most people who are listening have written down, it's not fair in your journal. Mm-hmm. I know I have written down, it's not fair many, many times, usually mm-hmm. for other things, although I'm only 5'1", and of course at 62, I can't eat that much either for such a, short person. But so I understand how that is. And of course we can all be jealous of people who have crazy metabolism, mm-hmm. whatever. But I like the truth you put for it. And I'd also write for the truth for that everybody has something, everybody has some sort of struggle, and this is my struggle, and mm-hmm. it could be a lot worse struggle, but it is still mm-hmm. a struggle. It feels like it is a struggle, right? It's hard.
Yeah. And it's something that I get to face daily. So I guess that's why you look at it as an opportunity, because you have to eat.
Right. Yeah.
You can't not eat. So every day I give that to God, even now. And it's 6 years later, and I still give it to God daily.
And it hasn't gotten easier during the 6 years? You still have to renew your mind about food?
I do still renew my mind about food.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
If you, and one thing you said at one time, you said, if it's a level 10 before for hardness, uh-huh. now it's about a 3. And so it's not very difficult in that way, especially eating outside my boundaries for refined foods. I don't find that hard anymore. But what I find difficult is sometimes sticking to the 3 meals, 1 snack, and no second helpings. Sometimes I want more. And that's more what I journal about now, is more is better. That's the lie that I always am coming against, because I always have that in my brain. Well, more is better. And the truth to that is, for me, less is better, because I don't feel sick to my stomach, and I don't feel bloated, and I don't feel yucky if I eat less. Whereas if I eat more, then I just feel gross. So it's not better.
Right. And you guys might not know this, because Debbie and I talked about before we started the interview, but she lost the weight just on the boundaries of basically giving up sugar and processed food. Right. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't any other limits. Was it sugar, processed food, anything else?
And dairy.
And dairy. And so you would lose weight, even if you eat as much as you want, if you give those 3 things up. And then she switched over to 3 meals and 1 snack a day, because she felt like it gave her more freedom. Why did you feel like that gave you more freedom? Because a lot of people would say, no, that's less freedom, because before you got to eat whenever you wanted, not whatever you wanted, because mm-hmm. you cut out all those things. But with this new one, you still have all the same things cut out, but you also have the 3 meals and 1 snack. So why did that give you more freedom?
I think because they're more simple. The other boundaries, it can be easy for me. I always have to read everything, and sometimes it can be really easy to blur the lines. And so I wanted really clear boundary markers. I wanted it to be super simple. And eating no refined stuff, it's simple to a degree, but over the years, I've put things back into my diet. Like I put maple syrup back into my diet, and honey back into my diet, and certain processed foods like, the odd little thing here and there, right? To maintain for
Oh,
a lifestyle. So as I did that, what I found is that now all of a sudden I have to be more careful about how much I'm eating. And then I started getting afraid that I'd put the weight back on.
yeah, that makes perfect sense. And so if anybody's listening, thinking of 3 meals and 1 snack boundaries, if you cut all that other thing, the stuff out, you are going to be able to lose weight and maintain. But if you add anything in that's fun to eat, like the
That's
maple
what I was
syrup
doing.
or honey, you can make some good little treats with that.
You
Then you will
can.
you'll have to be more careful about proportions. So that's in a way you had to renew your mind because you actually kind of switched your boundaries.
I did switch my boundaries.
Yeah,
Yeah.
letting
Very
those other
gradually.
foods in. But letting those foods in made it a little bit harder again. So then you start
It
renewing
did.
your mind again. Now, a lot of people would say, "What? You're still renewing your mind?" I thought we didn't have to renew because you've all heard me say I don't have to renew my mind anymore. So, how much time a day do you spend renewing, and is it a big hassle in your life?
I only renew my mind in the morning, and it's usually during my morning devotions. If I had a rough day the day before, then I'll renew about what was I thinking? What was I believing when I did that? That's how I renew my mind now. So I don't tend to do it. Yeah.
That doesn't take long then. Probably takes what, 5 minutes?
Yeah, it's usually about, I love to write. So I'd say like 15 minutes. I wake up super early in the morning because I love my morning time with God. So I just bring it into that. It's part of who I am. It's part of my relationship with God. So it's part of that time.
Yeah, that's good. I would agree with that. It's part of, it's part of a relationship with God time. I would also say if you're listening and you're like, you don't want to renew because you feel like it takes too long. So sometimes personalities that can make themselves do things are all or nothing personalities. They think they have to spend an hour renewing, or that's just how long it takes because of all the lies you put down. And so if you're listening and you're that person, then try and limit yourself to only like 2 beliefs and work on shortening it up to 5 minutes or 10 minutes until, it's a short enough amount that you're willing to do it and you like spending the time.
Yeah. A lot of time I'll open the I Deserve donut app and I'll look first I'll ask myself, well, what was I believing? And then I'll look for a lie that was close to that in the app. And then I'll kind of go through those questions.
Okay, that's good. And do you go through them in your mind or write them down?
In the morning, I write them down. But if I'm not at home with my journal, then I go through them in my head.
Okay, good. Okay. And do you also renew your mind about situations, like the hard things in your life or, relationships, different things like that?
Yes, I find I do that more now than I do about food. So
that's good.
I really like the form of truth journaling where you kind of like mind dump. You just, and then I go back and I put circles beside all the thoughts. So, and then I go and I will write. So I'll put like a number beside the way you do that. How you write, you
that's
blurt,
how I do
and then
my journal too.
So that's how you taught me to do it in your book. I love that form. And then I'll just write one, and then I'll write, well, what is that true? Or is it a partial truth? Or is it a lie? And then if it's a lie, then I'll say the truth. And if it's a partial truth, I'll say what's true and what's not. So and I do it about everything now. So I'm a people pleaser. So I truth journal about that a lot. I'm a perfectionist. Ooh, surprise.
That's not a surprise.
No, I have that personality. I'm a perfectionist. So I often fall back into the trap of feeling like I have to be perfect. And so then I truth journal about that. And I have 4 kids. And so there's lots of fears that come with that and kids growing up and all those things. And then I also am coming to pretty major transition with my 2 oldest graduating. So that's a big thing in my life right now. But I use truth journaling for everything.
That's great. And I love that transition that you started out just about the food and now you're using it to truth journal about life. How do you find that truth journaling affects your relationship with God?
It's huge because it makes me stop and think about what I'm thinking about. And that's where I really think God transforming and renewing your mind. I feel like I need to be part of that and that I need to be being quiet and I need to be bringing it to God and being ready to listen. And when I'm not truth journaling and I'm not renewing my mind, I find that I end up running around like a crazy person, just believing all this stuff and not even knowing it because I'm not pausing. And it isn't until I pause. It isn't until I pause that I realize, hey, wait, I'm believing something that's not true.
Yeah, I often find that there's kind of like a mental commotion in my mind, and those thoughts. So in the background of my mind, I have some worry or, whatever, some sort of emotion. And then I stop and think, what's causing that? And then take the time to truth journal about it or renew my mind in some way. Then the commotion goes away and I feel the peace or joy. Is that kind of how you feel?
Yeah, exactly. I call it my deep place. So it's my quiet, deep place where I just am with God and everything's just so still and quiet and I can think clearly. And yeah.
So a lot of people who struggle with perfectionism, they have a hard time truth journaling because they also apply their perfectionism to their truth journaling. And then it becomes a performance and not a time with God. So how did you avoid that?
It's funny you ask, because I used to be like that with journaling. I thought my journals had to be so beautiful and perfect. And then one day I had coffee spill all over my journal. And I felt like God was telling me you need to embrace that imperfection because that's part of it too. And I used this coffee stained journal, which for me, being a perfectionist, I don't like things like that.
Right.
But God started to show me that there was beauty in the mess. And that's one of the things I really truth journaled a lot about, is how there's beauty in the mess. And it's so true. And through that, he's changed me, because I would say that I'm not as much a perfectionist now than I was 6 years ago.
That's great. So what kind of beauty is in the mess? What does that mean on a practical level?
Well, just like kind of how you splash paint at a wall, right? And you can see beautiful in it. My daughter is the most creative whirlwind of color and energy. And she's very creative. And she's always, I say, a mess. She's like the whirlwind all the time. And I love her joy, and I love to see what she creates and all the beauty she has in her chaos. And I think God's really used that too, because I get to see all this stuff that comes out of her just being 5 steps ahead of herself all the time.
Yeah, that's interesting, because my daughter is also a writer. She writes fiction books. She has one published. It's called Chosen Children, but she has always loved to write. And I think the reason she loves to write is maybe it's just a part of her personality, but also, like when I was teaching them how to write, I said, I'm not going to correct anything. You just have to write for like 20 minutes. So they got used to just writing without any correction. And then she's not a perfectionist. But for me, for some reason, writing was tied into my insecurities. And that's why I hated it so much when I was trying to be a perfectionist. So to me, it seems like it's the same way with truth journaling. If you just, throw it all out there, don't worry about being perfect, you're going to enjoy it. But if you feel like it's a performance, and maybe, I don't know, do you think people believe it will only work if I do it perfectly? What are people believing that keeps them from enjoying it?
I think exactly what you said. It's only going to work if I do it perfectly. And for me too, it's aesthetic. Perfection for me, I like things to be in clean lines, and I like things to, I love the idea of bullet journaling, but as soon as I start doing it, I can't make it so perfect. So then I just get frustrated because I spend all this time trying to make it look good.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. So let it be messy. My journals are messy. I'll have a diagram and I'll have a little line about what I learned in the Bible that morning, and I might have a truth journal. So I just go, it's just a whole hodgepodge. And then what's the truth to it won't work unless I do it perfectly? What's the truth to that?
There's no such thing as perfect. That's what I tell myself all the time. There's no such thing as perfect. The only perfect one is Jesus. And he did things perfectly.
Right. And if we're learning a new skill, we're going to do it imperfectly, and we're going to get better as we go. So we're going to become better at it. So
I always tell myself mistakes are part of learning. You can't learn without mistakes. So that's a truth I say to that too. Mistakes are part of learning.
Good. So what are all the ways that you've grown in the past 6 years through the different journalings? Like if you're going to say, oh, these are maybe the 3 or 4 biggest ways God has changed me through the renewing of the mind, what would it be?
I go to God with my emotions instead of food. So being present with my emotions, feeling them, allowing myself to feel them and bring them to God, that's huge because I used to just avoid my feelings. And now I go to God with them and I say, why do I feel like this? And can you help me? So going to God for help has been huge. I also used to think I needed to save myself and that I needed to be perfect for God. But now I know that there's no such thing as me being perfect and that Jesus saved me. I love that part in Romans where it says he came at just the right time. And I feel like that's what God has done in my life. He picked me up out of my own pit and he saved me. I always say he's a lifter of my head because I was in such a dark place, because I didn't just struggle with obesity. I also really struggled with depression. And I feel like that cloud, that heavy, dark cloud was lifted off of me years ago. And through truth journaling and through continually bringing all my emotions to him, I no longer feel like I struggle with that, which is huge, huge.
I do think that's huge. And I think one cause of depression is letting a negative emotion go too far. So if you just worry like crazy, you're going to get depressed. Or if you're annoyed with somebody, you're going to get depressed. I mean, once we just let it go too far, if that makes sense. I don't know if you felt that way.
No, I agree. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the biggest thing would be that I don't look to the world for my identity because I know who I am in God. So knowing that I'm accepted for who I am, no matter what. And that gave me a lot of freedom.
That's good. I talked to another woman one time who did what you did in Truth Journal about body image first. And that she got to the point where she didn't care how she looked. And she said, I should have done it the other way around because now I don't care how I look. And so now I don't know if I care that much about food. And she was not very overweight, but I just thought it was kind of funny. But I do think they're equally important, giving up the idol of skinny, giving up the idol of food. And they work against each other. If we feel like we have to be skinny, it makes us overeat. And if we eat too much, then we start worrying about the weight. I don't know. They're not. Neither one is very helpful.
Like I said, it's two extremes. And for me, it was two extremes.
Right.
So I now feel like I have balance because I get to just live.
Right. So let me ask you this question. If somebody's listening to you, they're thinking, wow, 6 years, that's a long time. And, it just seemed like you love truth journaling, but I don't love truth journaling. Did you ever have some times during the beginning, like before the 6 years started? So back in 2017, where you're going through the process, did you ever feel like, oh, this isn't going to work? I'm not going to journal today. I'm not having any success. Did you ever feel that way?
That's a good question. I don't think I did because I really feel like it was just a moment for me where God picked me up out of that mud. It was like a light got turned on. And it wasn't about necessarily losing the weight for me at that time. It was about finding healing and finding emotional healing and mental healing and physical health. And I really switched my view from weight loss to health. And so the weight loss kind of came with that healing, if that makes sense. And then as I healed mentally and emotionally, I began to heal physically. But at the beginning, I was so raw and I was so broken. And I think that it was just my time with God was so precious and I needed it so much that I don't remember it ever feeling like it was a chore. I spent hours and hours and hours out on my back deck when I started. It was summer and my kids would be in the house playing and in and out, in and out, in and out. And I was just out there on the back deck, journaling and reading my Bible and digging deep into God's word and praying. And I felt like I was being lifted up out of something.
I feel like I felt the same way too at the beginning. It was just I got so much peace and joy, and the intimacy with God is what motivated me. And you did it with 4 kids. I did it with 4 kids at home. So we can do it even if our life is hectic. You journal with the kids running in and out. Mm-hmm. It must have not always been easy to concentrate, right?
Oh, not always.
Yeah.
So I did it outside because then they had to come find me. Mom.
Yeah, that's good. So it does help if you love that. It does help with your self-control because you're a person who's self-controlled. I wasn't, but I guess I definitely had moments where I felt like, oh, this could be like all the other times. I'll never be able to get over this. So again, each person's journey is different.
I think that it was actually later in my journey where I started to really handle the fear. And I'm still struggling. I would admit that. No, I'm not. That's amazing. Actually, there you go. I just had a revelation. For the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of being obese. I'm not afraid of being overweight again. When I was at my top, I was labeled grotesquely obese. And to have that label put on you, sorry, I'm getting emotional, but to have that label put on you as a human being, I just feel that's so wrong.
Yes, it's so wrong.
And that's where I had to really forgive my culture because I felt like, how could you label a human being with that label? And I was so afraid of going back there for so many years because I'd gone back twice. I didn't want to go back again. And I felt like I was just it's a matter of time. It's a matter of time. And it was through that's why I took on those new boundaries, because it was like Jesus was saying, I've got this, just trust me. You can rest and you can just let it go. And I've now let that go too. So that's a lot of freedom for me. And that, believe it or not, was actually through COVID, through the fact that I didn't gain my weight back during those years of crazy insanity. When everything, because I don't like change and I don't like transition, and everything changed and everything was up in the air and I didn't know what was what. And the fact that I didn't gain my weight back, to me, was proof that God is able to do the impossible.
Yeah, that's good.
And so for me, that's where I really started to go, you know what? No, I'm free because Jesus set me free. And he's still digging up roots for me. Because if you've lived a life where you've been labeled grotesque, you're going to have a lot of roots that run really, really deep. And I still have a lot of physical reminders of that life because I have lots of extra skin that people never talk about. And I have stretch marks and I have all those things that I still have to be daily telling myself, no, I'm accepted as me. And yeah, I just think that it's a journey. And for me, it really is a journey. And I took 34 years to start that journey. So it's going to take lots of years to dig up all those deep roots.
Right. And I'd also say too, that you knew how you lost it. I mean, you lost it through the renewing of the mind. You kept it off through the renewing of the mind. So if you were ever, tempted again to go back, go do the all or nothing thinking, you just renew your mind about it again. And I guess the other thing is, from the sounds of your first 2 stories, the reason you gain it back is you got tired of all the obsession with the counting calories and the exercise and all that. Are you still obsessing about any of those things?
No.
Yeah.
I never did. Not from the very beginning. I've never been obsessive over that stuff.
Okay. So that reason that made you gain the other 2 times isn't there anymore. So that's good too.
But I'm very strict. I have to say that. I'm very strict.
And that's good. I'm glad you said that, because with boundaries, I do think we need to be strict. We have to be as strict as an alcoholic who
fully
never drinks
agree with
alcohol. We have to never eat one bite outside our boundaries. So that said, we might still break them. I don't know if you break them.
I definitely have times.
Okay. And I do too. So it's being strict, but strict in a laid back way, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that kind of what it's like?
Not in an obsessive way. It's just what I do. It's not something that it's just what I do. It's just a no for me. No, I don't eat that.
We want to get to the point where it's a habit, where we don't even think about it. We only think of food when it's time to eat. So that is the goal. But when we break it, we don't beat ourselves up. We renew our minds if we have to. Some people have to do it, some won't. Or like yours, I kind of like your little system of just the next morning thinking about what you did. We're each different people, different personalities. So God has us on different journeys.
Yeah, exactly.
What advice would you give to the person who's listening to this show and they're you back in 2016 or beginning of 2017? They're like, I don't want to go to all that work again to lose this weight. What advice would you have for them?
There's hope. There is hope. You don't have to do it the way the world tells you you have to do it. You can let go and you can trust God because He is able. And He can do it. And He can do all things, even the impossible. And for me, it felt like it was impossible. Finding balance between the two extremes of diet and exercise and feeling sorry for myself and binge eating. There was no balance. I felt like it was impossible. And God did the impossible in my life. So, yeah, God can do it.
Yeah, God can do it. And what would you tell Him to do on a practical level?
Get a journal and get your book.
So get a journal.
Breaking Free from Emotional Eating. Working through that book for me was huge. And I worked through it really slow. So I would just do a little bit at a time. And then I would really ponder it and think about it. And like the one page you had where it was just a list of lies, I think it's in chapter 1. And you in the back, you have the appendix A, where you provide the truth. I would read those over and over and over until that's like you say somewhere, you have to choose journal until it replaces it. It's the first thing you think. Instead of thinking the lie, if you think it right away, you think the truth following it. And that's where it had over and over. And don't give up, because it's going to take over and over and over for those lies to start to be secondary to the truth.
I can't even remember. I had an appendix in that book. Yeah. So Debbie's talking about the My Bible Say. So the first book I ever wrote, Freedom from Emotional Eating, because now I have a new one called Say Goodbye to Emotional Eating. So it's a little bit confusing.
I have that one too.
Yeah, that's
I'm working through it. So 6 years later, and I'm working through it.
Well, that's great. Well, I think it's been super helpful just hearing what your process was like. I guess in the beginning, how often should somebody expect to have to truth journal, renew your mind? You're only doing it once a day now in the morning, but in the beginning, how often do you think somebody would have to expect to do it?
I was truth journaling at least twice a day. So like you had suggested, in the morning and in the afternoon, because I find I'm good in the morning, gung ho, woohoo,
right?
Classic story. And then by about 3:00, it's like, I don't want to do this anymore. So for me, I would have to journal in the afternoon as well. And I actually found, before anything that was like social, that's important for me still. I still truth journal before I go to like a Christmas party or before I go to a big gathering where I know there's going to be a lot of food and food's going to be the focus. I still often take times to sit down and journal about it and make a plan. Oh,
that's a great idea. So truth journal before, when you know temptation is going to come, and make a plan. Do you mean like you make a plan of, I don't know, what
kind of what I'm going to eat, what I'm going to allow myself to have? Cause I do break my boundaries, and I'm maintenance. So I've been maintaining now. So when I do break my boundaries, I try to plan on it. I'm going to eat this, which is, especially when it comes to my refined ones, like, okay, tonight I'm going to allow myself to have, I don't know, a samosa. I don't know. It's like something that's not within my boundaries. And I plan on it so that then I'm not feeling guilty. I know this is what I'm going to have. I look forward to that. And then I tell myself one and done. And if I can't eat something without having major cravings, then it's not worth it for me. If cravings follow then to me, it's like, that's not even worth it. It's not worth breaking my boundaries because I don't like it when the cravings return. And they do still.
Yeah. So. Yeah. It's not craving. It's not worth it. I hate
craving.
No,
I hate cravings.
Yeah. So, that's good. And that also makes me understand more too now why you need a truth journal, because and especially I think if you had a past where you've been like 150 pounds overweight, it feels even more important when you're doing something that's a little bit dangerous, maybe like if you love sugar, you've been addicted to sugar, to really truth journaling. Of course, some people have said, no, it's not worth it. It's not worth the risk. I'm just never going to have sugar. So again, that's, different based on a different person, but you're safeguarding yourself by renewing about it ahead of time.
That is what it is, for sure.
All those, in fact, in a way, that's a secondary boundary. If I ever have something like that, I plan for it and I renew my mind ahead of time.
Yeah. And if I do mess up and if I feel like I had a bad day, that's why I do it in the morning, because I'm big into grace over guilt. So if before I would beat myself up so bad, like in the past, the last times that I lost my weight, I would beat myself up black and blue over making a mistake or tripping up, and you're horrible, and how could you do that, and you're such a failure, and look, you're never going to be able to do it, and blah blah blah. And truth journaling really stopped that in its tracks, because as soon as I would journal any of those things I just said, like you're a failure, or you're never going to be able to do it, I would automatically apply the truth to that. And then that would stop that thought.
And what truth would you apply to it?
Well, let's say if it was that you're a failure, I would say, no, mistakes are part of learning and you made a mistake. That's the one I always tell myself if I hear that one. And then if you can't do this, I say, you're right, I can't, but God can. And if it's shame, like, how could you have done that? What a horrible person you are. Then I'll tell myself, no, it's just a flat out lie. You're not a horrible person. You're a good person. And just because you made a mistake in your food boundaries doesn't mean you can't love others well, and doesn't mean you can't love God well. And life's not all about food, and it's not all about weight loss. It's about God and loving others well. So it doesn't even come close to defining who you are.
Yeah, that's good. I used to tell myself similar truths, and I'd say something like, hey, this is your natural weakness. So you're bound to struggle. You're bound to fail at times. This is your personality, your natural weakness. And I'll say, hey, you're doing really great for somebody with your personality.
Yeah.
or I might say, I can't remember what the other one. Oh, I'd say, anytime I stop, it's a success. So even if I overate, anytime I stop, it's a success, because I could always have eaten more.
I've stolen that one from you. I say that to myself all the time. Anytime you stop, it's a victory. That's what I tell myself. So even if it's the next day, it's a victory.
Right. That's right. Because we could always do worse. So I just feel like you have so many good, helpful tips. So I hope all of you who are listening, I hope you're encouraged to try to make that habit of truth journaling if it's something that you having a hard time struggling with. It's worth the effort to learn how to do it.
Yeah. And I always remind myself that my weaknesses is where God's light shines through. So that's that opportunity. Any area that I'm weak, it's an opportunity to see God's strength. And where I'm weak is with food. I'm very weak with food. And so for me, that's an opportunity for God's strength to shine through. Because, oh my goodness, does his strength shine through. There are so many days that I stop and look at my life and go, God, how am I not even tempted to eat that? How am I not tempted? My husband's a chocolate lover. So he has chocolate all over my house. And it was just Christmas. And there's chocolate bars in my bedroom. And there's chocolate bars in my kitchen. And there's chocolate everywhere. And I don't even have the slightest inkling to eat them. And I think it's only because of God. Because I just don't even think about it. Now that's freedom. And only God really can set you free like that.
Right. And I also say that's all your truth journaling, because I felt like that for quite a while. I was never tempted. And then I stopped truth journaling. I don't know when I consistently truth journal about food or renewed my mind a long time ago. So my husband I'll ask him to hide things.
I love that.
If I'm struggling, if I'm going through some trial or something that's making me want to eat, I'll ask him to hide it. If my life is going great, then he doesn't need to hide it. And I could make the effort to, go back and start truth sharing about all that again. But right now I feel like there's other more pressing areas that God's working on in my life. So anyway, it's just interesting to hear how different people do things. So I hope all of you guys are encouraged by this little interview, and I hope you're encouraged by Debbie hearing what's God's done in her life. And Debbie, I really appreciate you being on the podcast, taking the time to visit with me.
Oh, thank you. So appreciate you. You have no idea how much I appreciate you. There's many times I've been very weak and I've gone, I can't do this today. And I'll turn on a podcast and I'll listen to your voice and I'll listen to the women you're interviewing and I remember, nope, I'm not alone and I can do this. So I'm so thankful and so appreciative of your podcast and all your resources. They have been a lifeline for me.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great encouragement to me. And it's also what a good thought to end on. You are not alone. So if you're listening and struggling, you're not alone. There's millions of others struggling with you. So I'm hoping that you go to God for help with that. So I hope you guys have a good week, and I hope you follow God, follow your boundaries, and try some truth journaling this week. And I will talk to you next time.